Good morning and welcome to Onward in Love and Caregiving. This week we return to a focus on family caregiving. 2 weeks ago, we began a series in which I discussed and spent time with you talking about families of origin and families of choice. And I hope in the time I've spoken to some of you, so I know that some of you have done this, and I hope others of you, if you haven't, will take advantage, perhaps go back and listen to the broadcast from 2 weeks ago. But spending some time looking at your life or your care recipient's life and seeing who is family of origin, who is family of choice. It will provide you with much needed information as the journey continues, because within that are people who have various talents that are needed, various connections that are needed, various time allotments that are available. So each of those plays a very important part. So I urge you to go back and look at family. And today we're going to look at the many faces of family caregiving. As I was preparing to do this broadcast, I couldn't help but look back at my original concept of the word family caregiver. And I remember it so well. This is well over 25 years ago when I met for lunch with Dr. Carl Flemister. And Carl invited me to create this program. And I remember saying to him, but Carl, my background is theater and theology. He said, we know that. But he said, your understanding of people is what we need to bring the many faces together. And at that point, I didn't understand exactly what he was meaning. I have come to understand I have a whole list of faces of family caregivers now. But the interesting part was at that point, when he said to me, family caregivers, I immediately thought of my grandparents. I was very blessed, as was my sister. We both, of course, knew our parents and we knew all of our grandparents. So at that particular moment, there were three of my grandparents still alive. And so as we talked, it was about them that I was thinking, caring for grandma and grandpa. Well, now I'm sitting here and I'm grandma and grandpa's age, and I know that I'm only one face. Yes, I'm very grateful to have been cared for in recent years, but the truth is there are many, many faces of family caregiving. And we as seniors are, of course, one of the first that people think of, and one of the first that often becomes the experience within a family as they go from knowing something about family caregiving to becoming an active participant in the world of family caregiving. So, yes, it is seniors, and people are living longer and longer all over the world. And that is the reason, for example, when I was in Bangkok to speak earlier, well, actually last year, for the International Federation on Aging, that was the big concern. Longevity. Longevity has given us many challenges and many blessings, and we need to look at them very carefully. Now, what would come immediately after seniors? Well, it would be seniors caring for seniors. And that's very true. I know many, just as I look out my window, I'm looking at a complex here in New York built originally by the Ladies Garment Workers Union. And in that incredible space are a lot of seniors now, people that I've grown up with, who are caring for their very elderly parents. The old, those who are 85 and beyond. And I'm getting closer to being that, so I'm going to join that. One more club to go to. But the truth is, that is a very predominant face. It is the caregiver who is a senior caring for another senior. There's also, and this is huge here in New York, but I know it's true of many other places around the world, and that is intergenerational caregiving. We often say grandparents caring for grandchildren, but it can be aunties and uncles. It's intergenerational. Often, very sadly, the reason for it is incarceration or drug, alcohol, rehabilitation, and needs for parents. And the grandparent gets called into service for the grandchild. Here in New York, and I always mention this because it's such a wonderful example, and wherever you may be, if you want to learn more about it, PSS, Presbyterian Senior Services. Their grandparent home was one of the first to be built to specifically address the issue of kinship. It's up in the Bronx, and it is an incredible, incredible story of the positive actions on all the levels based upon intergenerational caregiving and the wonderful services that are provided there. It's a great institution, and people come from all over the world to study there and to take example from it. So I urge you, Presbyterian Senior Services. Now, also in that same relationship, it's children as caregivers. Now, you may say to me, how does that work? Well, there are so many things. First of all, even before I get to that part, bringing the child, a young child, a teenager, into the world of family caregiving by asking them to do something that they are uniquely qualified to do. Now, what that might be? Running some errands, going and getting medications, certainly working with the computer when you need websites, when you need to check in for a hospital visit or a doctor appointment. Who better than to do the technology than these wonderful young people? And what does it do? It teaches them, oh, yes, there is this thing called family caregiving. And yes, I'm a family caregiver. So important. Name it and know its many faces. So these are wonderful, wonderful ways that they can begin. Here in our apartment building, I met the most wonderful, wonderful young person. He is the young child. He's about 8, 9 years old. Now, I may be wrong on the age, but I'm guessing. And he's started a wonderful little business in the building, and I just love it. And of course, I take advantage of his service, and that is when he comes in, he checks with the doorman to see if I or several others of us who use his service have a package. If I do, they ring me and say, Sam is here, and he has a package for you. And I say, yes, please send it up with him. And of course, I pay my $1 fee for no matter how many I have. It's the most precious thing that I have known. He's very entrepreneurial. He comes from very brilliant parents, both of whom are great entrepreneurs. And this child has only the most wonderful future. But you know what's happened? He's absolutely blessed Donnie in my life. He's so kind and caring, and we enjoy just having him pop in and bring a package for us and maybe have a cookie or something like that with us. So it's building a wonderful, wonderful relationship. Let them be part of it. Now, one of the areas in which caregiving has a face that is very well known worldwide, and that is long distance caregiving. We talked about this last week in the sense of family. Many of us here in New York City and in other big major cities around the world, we tend to be the only member of our immediate birth family who lives here. And therefore, our family of origin wishing to care for us, it's often long distance. That was my experience with my parents. My parents lived, they've now died, as have all my grandparents. So I've had lots of caregiving experience along with my wonderful, wonderful sister. But the caregiving experience that I had with my parents was long distance. I live in New York and have for nearly 60 years. My sister lives in Wisconsin and lived very close to them. So she was the primary caregiver, and that's something I was very aware of, and in fact, I had a note by my telephone when we'd have conversations. Kathy is the primary caregiver. There can only be one primary caregiver. And this may be my topic of choice and life, but Kathy in our family was the primary caregiver. I could make suggestions, but I would always defer to the option that she felt worked most appropriately and comfortably for her because she was the one who was going to initiate it. But that's long distance caregiving, and more of us are involved in it. I spent this morning on Facebook with 3 different families who are going through similar situations where the parents don't live here in the New York area, but the person being responsible for them very much is here in New York. And so this is where learning about care managers, about of geriatric case managers. All of this becomes extremely important. Finding out about ways to get help for them in another area. And we're going to be talking about that in some of our future broadcasts. But it's long distance caregivers. And that's certainly true for all the diasporas of the world. A number of years ago, I had the privilege of speaking and being part of a conference, a reunion literally of 10,000 of the diaspora of Indonesia, at which President Obama was the keynote speaker. It was a marvelous experience, but it brought to light what is it like to be a long distance caregiver when you can't go home for the weekend. It takes a whole day to get there from New York. So it's not the same options as I had in running out to Wisconsin, just a 2-hour flight. So all of these things come into play, and yet family caregiving is present in all of them and can be done in very positive ways. Now, another area is chronic conditions that knows no age. No one, no particular age is with a chronic condition, but it remains constant throughout a lifetime. So that is another face of caregiving. We talked about the AIDS crisis, and that is life, end of life, in the middle of life. That was a huge experience, and it continues. That is not over. It is very similar in certain aspects to what we experienced in the COVID pandemic. 2 huge pandemics, certainly in my lifetime. Now, why am I telling you all these faces? And I've got some more, but I'm going to pause here for a moment because you're probably wondering, why am I telling you about all these faces? So that you can be appreciative to what you are experiencing and what other people with whom you may be working or helping or being part of their care team. We need to know that not always is it one caregiver for one care recipient, but the caregiver may be caring for multiple persons, sometimes someone older, someone younger. That we call sandwich generations. But at the rate people are living, as a friend of mine said up at a Bronx, I'll never forget this, at a Bronx senior center, she said, "We're not club sandwiches." And I said, "Okay." She said, "We are totally club sandwiches. There are 9 generations in my family." She said, "Not sandwich, we're club sandwiches." And I love that because there are so many generations, and with each generation was a challenge. So being able to be aware of that the person with whom you're dealing may indeed be caring for one person, and you think that's the only issue in their life. Being aware to what else they're doing. And also, as we are dealing with people, those of us who are professional caregivers, understanding what the full scope is for that family caregiver. Now, in the LGBT world, most family caregiving situations that we've talked to so far were really vertical, up and down, multiple generations. That's not really true for the LGBT world. Ours is much more a horizontal. And as people die, there are less and less and less persons. Now, wonderful organizations like SAGE and some of the center here in New York City, they are doing wonderful things to bring about some intergenerational relationships, both from an educational point of view and a mentoring point of view, quite frankly. But basically, the LGBT world is a horizontal one, and we need to remember that. Also, the military, our wonderful, wonderful veterans. The wars of today are leaving wounds that are not like wars of the past. These are wars that remain physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And very often, the spouse and the veteran have a lifelong chronic condition with which they are dealing. And then what happens? Kinship comes in, grandparents, aunties, and uncles helping with the children because you're dealing with a chronic condition and kinship. But we have resources, and I'm pleased to say we were early pioneers with the New York City Family Caregiver Coalition in bringing about awareness and bringing about national attention to this. Now, I talked to you the other week also about caregiving within an apartment house. Very possible. An area that received a great deal of attention from the very talented writer, actor, and director Sam Simon. He wrote a play entitled The Actual Dance, and it was his story of his wife's breast cancer. Now, he has played this in places all over the world, and I've had the pleasure of doing several off-Broadway runs with him. And the power of it is incredible because Sam was willing to tell his story, his vulnerability, I don't know why, it's extremely because we do not normally hear men telling their story. Caregiving has been originally women, and then the LGBT world, and now more and more youth and men. So it's something that we are all involved in. But Sam's play, which is now also a book, The Actual Dance, I urge you to take a look at that. And two more, just very quickly. One I had the privilege of doing for the United Nations. I was asked to speak on a forum that was taking place for the goals that are going on, the SDGs, and it was on homelessness. And so I very specifically got to know and continue because of it to know and care for those in my immediate block areas. And because of what I had done, I was able to be very involved during the COVID crisis in helping that population as well. And I learned so much. But the structure within the homeless population is incredibly caring. And I have seen more and more wonderful stories of caregiving among those who have the absolute least, but they are totally willing to help one another. And it's an extremely powerful story and one that is filled, obviously, with a great deal of addiction and recovery. I can't urge you enough. Pay a little attention to that. And finally, probably the most powerfully shocking experience I have ever had was the result of one of the brilliant professors, Dr. Tina Moschke at Fordham University. And Tina, who has been in criminology and dealing with the prison systems, made me aware of a motion picture entitled The Angola Project, a documentary. And the basis of it was caregiving within a prison population into which no one else can go. So it was literally murderers caring for other murderers. And in that film, I saw some of the most powerful, powerful stories of redemption, of transformation, of people going deeper than they ever thought they were going to go and finding that soul and spirit within because of having cared for a fellow prisoner. And the freedom that came with that within the confines of a prison is powerful and a statement for all of us from which to learn. Now, that was quite a list of faces of family caregiving. But it's so important that we know them, that we name them, because naming it gives resource, gives understanding, and certainly gives dignity. So I urge you, your homework for this week is to consider the faces that you are dealing with, perhaps personally or in your immediate circle. You'll be quite surprised, and you will make a difference. I thank you so much for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you once again. As we always say, onward in love and caregiving. Namaste. God bless, and I will see you real soon. Thank you.